Yeah, I'm ready to go.
Okay, cool. Healthcare institutions are foundationally shaped by the intimate violence of anti-black captivity that provides the echo-coherence for the world. Slave ships were more than floating tombs. They were floating laboratories in which the conceptual apparatuses of insurability and bodily well-being were defined negatively against blackness, such that captive slaves became the signifying property of absolute pathology and risk because they were unable to resist the imposition of disease, sexual violation, and death. Discussions over the costs and benefits of the insurability of health mystify and repeat inform the structuring origin of insurance as an anti-black technology of speculation born out of care. Christina Sharp asked us to consider the slave ship Zong achieving notoriety through the throwing overboard of Africans in order to collect insurance. The court case tells us that this was not a case of murder, throwing overboard of goods named the Zorg, which translates from Dutch and English as care. Pause for at least a moment on the fact of a slave ship named Care, registering as the provision of what is necessary for health, welfare, maintenance, and protection. We should remember that slave ships were more than floating tombs. They were floating laboratories, offering researchers a chance to examine diseases. Doctors could take advantage of high mortality rates. We should remember those still abandoned. We should pause again on the name of a U.S. military medical ship named Comfort. U.S. military, comfort, and medicine, each together being terms whose connection on bodies of black people weren't alarmed from experiments on the laboratory of the slave ship to J. Marion Sims's surgical experiments to the outbreaks of cholera in Haiti to experiments on buster gas and U.S. black soldiers to Tuskegee and Guatemala to responses to Ebola to ongoing forced sterilization to studies that show that black people in the United States receive inferior health care because they are believed to feel less pain. We pause because that ship named Comfort is too close to another one named Care, the Zong. The question for theory is how to live in the wake of slavery to rupture this episteme. Now, blackness is medicine's referent for risk. Enslavement, therefore, was not simply a political system, but an unconscious grammar of worlding that inaugurated the world's ethical dramas by violently suturing blackness to everything that personhood and humanity was not. Kish and Leroy, 15. Recurrent crises constantly whiteness through the capacity to control one's exposure to future risks. Blackface demarcates those who are unable to shield themselves. This racialized order is evident from access to insurance and healthcare in search for new horizons, finding answers with hard searching for ways to transform average populations to a winning bet instead of abandoning these. They incorporate into financial system the excitement erases the long history of financial experimentation premised on the availability of black bodies as guarantors for the risk. New technologies have endorsed as moral advances, opening up new sources of risk protection to accept such logic is to ignore how the conditions that made finance profitable in the first place are the conditions that cause the forms of dislocation. Finance now proposes to fix. Now, debates about health insurance pursuing access to a universal account of subjectivity that aligns the structural position of blackness within civil society. Limited debates concerning contingent violence are incapable of questioning the very crisis at the heart of our academic institution. The one who sees ruthless criticism of health insurance cast debate itself as a conceptual dead zone, a graveyard within which the slavery forms the constituent foundation for both health and contemporary democracy. Saucy and Wood, 16. Liberalism's conceptual structure of gratuitous violence in which black people find themselves violated simply for existing signifies blackness, non-human blackness, distance, boots, users, the ethics of civil society as it binds together society's debates within acceptable limits that appear to be shared by all because they all appear to enter the circumscribed terms willingly and distresses the stability of ontology itself. The acceptable to limits of civil society's ethical debates are speechless about black positionality. Blackness is a crisis-prone element at the center of every social institution. The academy forms known that democracy as unfinished is the fortification of humanism's universal subject with exclusion as the basis for subjectivity. We can only construct a new world through the ruthless criticism of everything existing. James has referred to the conceptual dead zone, a graveyard where discussions of black genocide and slavery as constitutive to democracy lay buried as impermissible knowledge. Mainstream analysis finds sustenance from the dead zone. What is happening to blackness to give life to vampiric racial optimism? Gratuitous violence turns the black body into flesh and destroys the possibility of ontology. So the only way blackness can appear to participate alongside the denizens of the democratic polity is by way of a structural adjustment wherein blacks are perceived to act as if they possess ontological capacity. The price of this ticket is that analysis must remain within the agreed upon limits of knowledge and ethics. This sequesters black collective existence through a suggestion that black lives would matter if only the police were prosecuted, if politicians would apologize for mass incarceration, or if a university president would resign. The resolutional call to channel questions of health into healthcare demands a strategic bracketing of education to align the ontological condition of anti-black violence. Healthcare reform is an institutional mystification of the foundational antagonisms of black slavery and native genocide which structure health, Geary and Haran. 17. Healthcare is now the source of knowing the answer to health inequality. Its role is widely overstated. We could improve health a lot without modern healthcare institutions channeling questions of health into questions of healthcare is one way to not talk about the ways that health is structured with racism, sexism, and economic inequality. Healthcare comes in to manage disease and ill health and in replace precisely the racism, sexism, and class elitism that structure health in the first place. Black health isn't simply a matter of lack of resources, racialized poverty, but an outcome of direct state violence. Real questions whether it's possible to strengthen the welfare wing of state simultaneously eliminating state violence, particularly in the U.S. where the history of the state is the history of white supremacy, anti-blackness, and native genocide. The answer is no. Improving the system simply means improving the parasitic relation of society and black fungible accumulation, red genocide on God by sex and questioning on what to do. Anti-blackness isn't fully captured by the concept of state racism, but is a problem of the world. I can't imagine the liberatory politics of health involves reliance on the state. What is to be done? Voice that question as it occurs within the confines of anti-blackness. How do they know their pragmatic work makes things better rather than simply shuffling around the suffering while hiding or making things worse? How are they other than utopian, far more utopian than Afro-pessimists? Be realistic, man. The impossible to challenge of Afro-pessimism is how to think or act ethically without optimism. Optimism is fundamentally unethical. That observation does provide a starting point to ask the questions within anti-black world. One should never succumb to optimism. The health of black people can only be secured by the impossible. The end of this world. This world is unimaginable. From here, do we need to be able to imagine a future beginning? No, it's the only way to begin. If you think this world is impossible, if you could imagine it, it's probably some variation of this world, not another one. Now, as a non-black subject whose subject position has generated humanist notions of health, the only possible response is one of self-abolition. This is what Kieran Ahrens describes as the only possible horizon for a non-black struggle that does not reinforce anti-blackness, a negative of identity politics is when we collectively clear the path for an assault on the conditions that enforce those identities, which paradigmatically constitute a self, which is not a recentering of white or non-black identity, but rather the multiplication of the fronts from which the material and symbolic apparatus of humanity can be destituted. Aaron 16. What interests me is how groups can struggle without attempting to lay claim to a positivity on the basis of trans individual objects unavailable to black flesh. How can non-black persons not fortify the anti-black existential commons? We must reject any appeal to innocence. We must begin by abandoning our own legitimacy. Revolution should be measured by our capacity to destitute beyond the destruction of higher lives as deactivation. We must no longer envision the remedy for suffering as the recovery of a lost homeless. Resistance must foreground the destruction of the subjectifying process. We ourselves must be overcome to the extent that struggles refuse forms of subjectivities. These can be aligned with the black struggle against its own objecthood. By refusing the plenitude of subjectivity, they avoid recomposing the human. It draws coordinates not from analogy, but from a disidentification with the human, merging from the position in which it occupies self-abolition and the end of this world are best conceived as parallel vectors insofar as their potential crossing constitutes a presently unthinkable vanishing point. Fighting in common enemies not being a common experience of the enemy, while solidarity cannot be stripped of paradigmatic incoherence, must be premised on a disidentification with ourselves. This we aims to take seriously paradigmatic differences, yet be cautious about implying unnecessarily exclusiveness. We might find something more powerful than the self-suppressed available to us and denied to them. What is necessary to find the self and kill it, and abandoning the desire for legible subjectivity, open the possibility of an undercommons whose maroons wage a war of apposition. Now, debate is not just a risk-free game to agonistically test ideas. Technologies of health are created at the micropolitical levels that are inflected by racialization. The ballot functions as an opportunity for an exhaustion of redemptive equilibrium, an eschatology without telos that holds the end of the world as an imperative. Smith and Vesuvin. 17. Political events demand our attention not as breaks with past best continuities, which life and death are made sensible. Anti-blackness of white supremacy rely on racialized definitions of who counts as human. This spatio-temporality of races connotes ways that people are marked as backward. This grammar sends futuring the white subject and disqualifies non-white subjects for full humanity. The deaths of black palm economic subject are accused with slow death and ever-present vulnerability associates black with the Neville social death, intraproductive vitalism, and the quest for the optimization of life. How is the capacity to affect hope or alter future trajectory shaped by matrices of risk, care, neglect, and lethality in which bodies are imbricated? Illiberal applications of biomedical advances may reify structural racism by finding race the bodies of color in newly inventive ways through a logic of inclusion. Medical interventions imprint pathology onto bodies, creating archives that re-ontologize race technologies. Ontologically secure blackness is found future by fixing black bodies as the problem. These rely on politics and music to take for granted legacies of damaged health. Medical technologies purport create an inclusive future, but here erase the body's pathology. Medicalizers are bound to blackness. Science is invoked as limits horizon for innovation, technology, and medicine's gloss and surface humanity pretend that the biological substrate exists without a racial history, and that medicine and technology have race-free past or race-free future. Futurity is dangerous. Efforts to include, marginalize, naturalize, or reinscribe race rather than attacking the hierarchy of humanity that produces uneven distribution of life and death. Equating futurity progress leads to repetition rather than rupture. The disruption requires a seizure of the arsenal through abolitionist practices to undo the grammar that binds us to a narrowly defined human future. Voting affirmative means being accomplices to a black feminist refusal of healthcare. The only ethical role of healthcare researchers is to make visible the contradictions born of blackness within medicine. Harvey 16. What is being made of a black public to refuse to participate when healthcare systems pay little attention to the ongoing trauma, colonialism, and child slavery is fundamental to collective wellness? This is not played by the rules of the health markets. Regulation of individual moral virtues and ethical practice of knowing does not only acknowledge the refusal, but is complicit in it. Ethical learning must be willfully permeable to contamination is an openness to contaminate epistemology that relies on the equivalence of knowing and mastery and disavows the violence that produces the Gila cells continue to be animated by Henrietta Lacks as a sign of black female hypersexuality. Gila becomes the temporal and affective force of accumulation that explodes the integrity of black subjectivity. Each Gila bomb ruptures linear biopolitics, making the past material and confrontation of Gila becomes a worldling force that troubles linear biopolitical time by violently demanding that the boundaries between the past, present, and future be called into question. This ethics of learning requires a will towards understanding the self and its time is contaminated. This openness to learning and permeability and contamination is a risk that cannot be managed. RF's fracturing of debate stalls. Reject any understanding of debate that doesn't exhaust its violence. Power 16. The ruling class loves debate. Debate is what future arms dealers are taught to engage. How judges sleep at night. How the powerful pretend that normal running of things is fair. The an entrance exam. Ask boys to hypothesize being prime minister and to defend shooting protesters. We catch a glimpse of moral flexibility. This imaginative exercise does remain hypothetical. These people move from volatile scenario on page to violent action in real life without ever encountering clubs. Without ever encountering protests protected by schools. Clubs being trained to argue anything as long as it preserves the existing orders. The definition of law by the same moral flexibility. The being society teaches the rhetorical lubricant that ensures the ruling class will always win. No one will ever win the debate because the entire purpose of the debate is to prevent anything truly disruptive from ever happening while masking real violence from being seen. Debate is one disciplining technology that runs from school to court. If anyone deviates from the rules to say seize the debate form for the sham it is displacing the imposed platform, then the true face of all those who defend debate is revealed. Those who are most powerful pretend that they are under siege by those who are unreasonable. We see this as at universities where there are bigoted views pretend they are forced out. Debate is a cover story, never having to be honest. They are true intensive while pretending to be open-minded. Debate dissociates argument. We disagree with the way in which you want to say it. Us to say it. Market say it.
Yep. I'll send that out for process.
Say it, you said?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sweet, ready?
Yeah.
How does the app engage in a black feminist refusal?
It is a process of complicity with black feminist refusal. Harvey says that within the context of researchers, especially within
privileged university settings that the means by which we need to even approach discussions of health is by centering images and instances of refusal that black feminists and other black radical movements have
So my
engaged
question
in.
is, how do you as two white debaters and judges engage in that black feminist refusal?
Yeah, so it's, again, not that we engage in the refusal, but that we should affirm the refusing, the acts of defiance that have existed throughout history, because our argument is that there is an archival bias within discourses on health towards focuses on inclusion, which is seen in, which is seen like throughout the
Does
sort of,
the app, do you mind if I move on to the next question?
Sure.
Does the app engage in refusal of every form of health?
No, the app engages in a refusal to reproduce images of incorporation within the context of debate.
Right, so it's just in the context of debate, but
our argument will not be that that every black woman or person should refuse health in every instance. It will be that within the specific context in which we exist within this educational setting, we should refuse to reproduce research that folds blackness into an institutionalized
Why do you as two debaters have that burden to engage in those refusals?
So for instance, there's a couple answers to this argument, but the Aaron's evidence in particular says that if non-black subjects do not explicitly confront their entanglements of their very subjectivity with the sort of instances of anti-black violence throughout history, then it merely reproduces
This is true in the context of how the resolution has reproduced the signifier of health. Because us as non-black individuals live within the context and category of health, it is our responsibility to deactivate its instrumental power.
The Geary and Huron card says in the unhighlighted portion that clean water, workplace safety, regulated safe water and housing are necessary. So should we be granting those forms of health?
It's not that they're necessary. What Geary is saying is that these are things that are better ways of approaching the question of health, but the end point of that card is important, where he says, even if all these things are true, the utmost important thing is never succumb to optimism. Never fold oneself into an understanding of political hope that trades off with
Geary says that we could focus on things like clean water, health, and safety regulations. So why can't that be focuses on like better access to health?
No, because all of those things would still focus on discourses and images of inclusion. His point is just like, it's interesting how this discussion elides those considerations, but not that focusing on those things
I guess
solves
my question is then, what is the alternative to those discourses of inclusion?
The alternative to those discourses of inclusion is instances of refusal and defiance. That's
Which would
Harvey's
be constituted
argument.
as what? So refusing and what?
So for instance, the way in which it's a process of like an intergenerational transmission of knowledge to know to refuse, to know to antagonize. This is
that all? So then what? All right, so if we say things like clean water are important, however we're only refusing, what does that mean for black communities that are disadvantaged?
Well, that question has to be unpacked in terms of, are you talking about this individual space? Are you talking about particular movements on the ground?
That's good. I really hate the constant photo streams. I'm just like, I wasn't prepared for this.
Anybody not ready? One second. Yeah. You ready, Shem?
1 second. I honestly haven't like that down with stuff.
Resolved before Colon meets the legislative forum, ACC 13 Colon issues a formal resolution after the resolve the council position maker U.S. should need governmental action. Erickson all three. Each applicant to the open age to the act U.S. work should there shacks to governmental means promising policy of future acting entire base while summing all trooper NHI is comprehensive and universal public insurance, YD and 17 national health insurance, finance medical insurance, the government to everyone who lives in the given country. Definitive one is procedural fairness, one is limits, not defending topical action, not limit the topic to anything being topical, not defending the U.S. explodes topic by including limited mechanisms and actors makes it impossible to be negative because we can never have adequate case tags and strategies to affirm this limits is an impact in and of itself because it trades off a job school for personal interest and privilege of certain debaters and guarantees exclusion for debate, which turns their offense to is ground their interroots, pre-tournament research and strategy. The resolution is the only thing that every team definitively sees equal access to and guides research. We can't get decides countermine specific cases that they don't get the topic. Also forces the mag into unethical concessionary ground, which encourages avoidance and circumvents the core question. The 1AC3 is sort-side debate over race status point is crucial to improve policy planning over healthcare issues. That's key empathetic learning and understanding topics from both sides. It also ensures inclusion of their method on the negative. For its refinement of educational test comes where truth claims it's necessary to assess the internal links of the app and leads to innovation that ultimately cultivate the app. Because our resolution will focus utilizes the incentive structure of competition, foster in-depth clashing rigorous culture of justification or a predefined point of status. Utilizing the name with the negative is critical to avoid group polarization and often disqualifying an orientation argument, which causes there 3 steps ahead posture and 16 deliver of the negative. Agreement without disagreement can be deceptive. Polarization biases can be countered and dismantling lines opposing positional profit by looping the negative in the face of exchange for arguments and test and improve our position. Our adversaries much more motivated potential for our disagreements are integral beyond the topic of exploration of commonalities. Objectives cannot be achieved by a non-argumentative procedural that debates by our winning that helps to keep our participants engaged. By activism counts does not come to by ontological commitment. There's no single best style. They are engaged in the same process of roughly the same material and practices. And topical version of the affirmative, the USFD should establish a universal public health system through single-payer financing that solves all what causes disparate treatment. APJ in 2009 myriad groups have a sense of organization to all positions supporting universal affordable coverage, stable financing, and controlling account avoids racist criticism and elevate social and economic disparities that undermine health and strong public health system. Public health is required to test all sectors of society as these real and social justice, all vital roles in health of our communities, racial and ethnic health disparities, and highly the majority of the population is vulnerable to disproportionately African American Latinos, higher rates of infant mortality, VIPs, mortality, and AIDS, and increased risk of cancer, people with disability, chronic condition, being denied terms of physical and reduce access to preventive care for disabled women, health impact is called to make condition broader social and economic policies that affect health impact, the assessment broad spectrum of local, political, and state federal policies, telemedicine, reduce barriers to geographic and isolated rural state with user people's visible language or translation needs, healthcare economy and oversight, community health planning and regulation should improve performance, improving the population health and training, and public health infrastructure governments at all levels should be developed a strategy for public health and align funding mechanisms supports implementation organization 30,000 health departments, collaborative engagement levels, government performance and economy indicators, and integrated interoperable communication networks that disaster preparedness responsible payer based directly for all healthcare eligibility guaranteed on not achieving the system of healthcare large federal governments that can negotiate to afford rights and reduces administration costs, finance, and guarantee a wide public finance for the universal coverage of the organization report. Second off, treating racism as an immutable force perpetuates class pressure by mystifying how elites use racism to divide and conquer strategy to prevent effective resistance, reducing power to privileges, anti-historical and forfeits crucial analysis that annual influence for class-based solidarity. Taylor 2017 black unemployment twice of white, 38% of black children, poverty, racist, and highly local economic issues. Those issues that reinforce each other in constant struggle for how to find understand this role. It's impossible to understand racism and its correlation to class struggle with Trump's ritual direct immigrants, Arabs, Muslims, and African Americans. He is a draconian austerity here provides the framework for privilege for all Americans. It reduces the issue of power to individual difference. That there were people within that working class who face additional oppression because of gender, race, ethnicity, religion, national status. This is perpetuate to count most ordinary white people thinking they have power. Anything reform is real. It's pervasive issues, whether or not it's immutable. It's anti-historical ideas constantly in flux. They vary each ordinary white and black people to join together. How does 1% maintain control and divine conquer is avoiding systematic racism, which is systematically undermine the struggles of ordinary people. It's for an impact on black people, and I think are automatic. That is why we need to go to political left and engage in politics and debates about put towards a visual and identification. What we think is the problem is now the impact is global rights, violence, and social death against disposable populations on a global scale. To grow in 14, we witnessed mobilization of violence system in the liberal state within machine or social the neoliberal killing machines march march globally because violence is waged against individuals such as immigrants engaged in and avoid that proletariat black people in the face of massive inequality, increased poverty, punching the attack on politicians. Forces now another that pass of power in the ability to maintain control of institutions. Wrong to talk about the militarization of police. Recognize the metaphor of the war zone as an applicable positive whether it's against politicians and organizations, machine or finance militarization society, not just police. It is and the white reducing punishment from the prison to schools to the streets. These taxes have been going on in the black community, but what is new with the intensity of violence and low material machinery to death and way more sophisticated, but death their impact of rapid dolarization, police voice support back communities is nothing short of terrifying. It's impact of violence takes place in advanced genocidal state under neoliberalism. The circle is considered disposal or stabilizing, expanding the heavy handed is only racism, part of authoritarian mode of government. They will use violence and new threats, the liberal capitalists or it's not about the violence racism. The one count about systematic racism, which will allow without U.S. has become followed to the politics of market fundamentalism, militarism, and disposability. The alternative is a class-based analysis when you see racialized and sexualized violence are necessary things to address for any true capitalist struggle. Homogeneity is the problem with their strategy, not ours. By Clarendon Data Bell and 04, my more concentrated understanding historical structure data space for grounding class knowledge as a secondary than concerns of those marginalized by race, but it's often super grounding capitalist social relation on rights, the importance of alternative difference here, turbulence, struggles against race in favor of class-based politics, idealized white. Such formulation for us in general and spoken logic assumes racial minorities only construct related to the working class. Most markets critiques race and so far as well as people of color could not possibly consideration beyond racial differences, positive people of colors. One-dimensional characteristics assumes they're working class whites will less control their self-understanding than is the case with their white non-capitalist primitive class means that building multiracial, multi-gender working class organization would be both any revolution for the primary state of class fight further against racism, sexism, the center of oppression is multiple understanding created culture, non-exploitation oppression are defined by capitalist ruling, capitalist development, U.S. society, African American and Asian bodies who colonize and racialize race and structure are all which is perfect class relation or function of physical traits, city emergent capacity or verify social relations on racism and actual modality which class struggles and particularly those strategic points is cited there on which the world Chinese markets and and phrases. Do one makes a given number of person, one called race blindness and direction about the structure of practices of caste relation, person or body whose markets have failed to see the most medical and merit of past research, the annexation of the global, the dominance of capital, the aim at educated theories of disease, displacing caste analysis, the case debate, analogizing present health and church of the song is not only factually incorrect, but naturalizes oppression. Go right, Yancy, 15, we are not slaves, not for slavery, and for lower the difference between our condition as slaves and racial. No one such how racial hierarchy, link past and present, ownership, abstract magnitudes like what is art helpful. We have to see if economic conservatism exists here, concrete all day, open white, not the multi-layered struggle of Manichaean of the colonizers, creates a Manichaeism of the colonized about places to get that. Now, new research practice need to provide concrete demands for policy interventions. Their calls for refusal continue the status quo paradigm of structure between theory and practice that continually calls Black Death. That turns the Menzel 14 research for public health hypothesis, systematic racism, responsible retail, and explicit critique of structural and the latter, including police violence and segregation, unequal access in healthcare. Finding these horse sources of trouble with dire consequences of lines of ignoring opportunity after the thing and body impact race rules, generation of policies and intergenerational implications. We need to include concrete recommended normal exteriors as considered the new research so for field translating corresponding new public health practices, campaigns, and the individual respectively entirely unaddressed as the structural factors that preponderance of her research and keeping Black and death rates high, among other things, deconstructualized by politics consistency and issued in destructive theory, practice, public health, and scientific knowledge about preventing death and actual public health and variation among Black infants. Now, anti-Blackness is not the foundation for health insurance. There happens it's not in the context of it in the first place. Massive demographic shifts prove that Black health statistics have dramatically improved in the last 20 years, much more than other racial groups. Severities in 16, the suicide rate of Black men declined, and the only racial group to drop in from mortality no more than 51 less than double the decline for whites. Likely because they got struck 3.4 years, small history the death by homicide for elected, increased by 40% over 1995 to 1917 for elected, improved for Medicare, Medicaid, increased access to health, education, hospitals, and Jim Crow. Homicides have gone down faster for Blacks, Black, white, Gavin, homicides by 40% decline. Violence is a major social factor that has reshaped society. They were the experience of kids that were recent of their experience of urban life. There's been true progress, and yes, tangible results can happen. There are some examples.
Go on, Gordon.
Anti-Black violence is contingent, not transhistorical political commitments can transform the world. The fatalism only nationalizes violence. Gordon Superhall said the anti-Black world is not made to feel what the world is anti-Black. Such a project is not an achievement. Black people have wanted to continue to fight as well as the Black BLM the same applies to social attention. What a further even those real relations so but the basic purpose of elected from foreign countries to blacks among each other have limited world substance and others and harmonious they tend to impose a Manichaean structure instead of a dialectical absence of agency guards, ethics, liberation, politics, the Afro-Western pieces, the hidden purpose of white agency versus Black capacity proponents respond to theories of agents who avoid the fallacy of confusing source and outcome. The history is not a sort of short of bad ideas from good people. The goal is Afro-pessimism, achievement over the attitudinal symptom of active society pessimism is the other side of optimism with their nihilism. People no longer want to be responsible for actions such as being trying to events actually unfolding the future as anti-government slavery and such for it and coming to action without guarantees or rules macro and macro acts or resistance escapes or transcend the course for struggles like Afro-pessimism are failed to understand failure. What does an initiative work transfer to do for something new and alternative is a relational human model that comes to negotiate ongoing relation, not one the interest situation without shifting our trends can opportunity before actions and the radical barriers for relationships that facilities and other outcomes. The Haitian Revolution charged rebellion, sharks and Jamaica turns and tools and Curacao. African would collapse in a faith. You said market?
Yeah.
Okay. Healthcare is not structured by the little economy, structural race in which medicine is valuable. Value 17, the structural race to do the benefit of paying people analysis, the structural race to need to bring your to change them. A new way of public health capitalized structure and advocate to ensure that medical public health truly incorporates essential of pedagogy and races went into a standard coursework approach based on structural competency, cultural humility, cultural safety, encourage lifelong competence, our relation, mutual exchange, several local health boards have already immigrant rating anti-racism, training and staff professional well, and introducing promoting the direct organization training and anti-racism legislation judgment, its contribution to organizational factors, removing racism, institutional protective about the health, diversity, constructive racism as natural and shaping the distribution of of health without a vision of health equity would commit to tackle structural racism.
Can you send out that research card in the one that you sent?
Yep. And was that last card Bailey? Sorry.
That was Bailey, yes.
That was Bailey.
Sorry about that, Dylan.
No, you're
I think we just didn't click save.
That Menzel card is. Thank you.
Right, you good?
Yep.
All right, cool. So I guess what is the impact of topicality?
There are two impacts. One is fairness, the other is education. We have isolated a few internal links to fairness, limits, ground.
Yeah, what's the terminal impact of fairness?
Yeah, there are a few terminal impacts. One is that debate is intrinsically valuable, knowledge seeking is good, and we should engage in it. Two is that clash is good, it generates better strategies. What?
Why is knowledge good for its own sake?
Because knowledge enables us to engage in strategy building and it allows us to engage in an ethical relationship to the world. These are all things
I'd like to be clear too,
precondition
fairness is a
for.
terminal impact.
What
So-
strategies would your model of debate have in relation to our affirmative that we cannot produce?
I'm unsure what the question was.
You said that
asking.
it's necessary to improve strategies. You also had a refinement standard. What is the way that you want to refine our app that you're unable to do?
We should be able to test the truth claims of the affirmative in a way that is fundamentally equal with
So
the ground that the
then,
affirmative is.
if we had attached what you would say is a topical plan to the app, what would you have read to answer it that wouldn't have only answered the plan mechanism?
we could answer the plan mechanism in a way that interacts with the scholarship of the 1AC, and that is important.
So like how?
We'll defend that. So we'll say maybe the, I guess, drawbacks to engaging in the plan would be negative.
I think that there's multiple examples of why like advantages differ, right? So there's distinctions between like there could be barriers to health access and the app doesn't solve.
This also ignores that the resolution's not just like healthcare good, it's
yeah, I understand. We said that SQUO debate practices sort of thrive on images of black incorporation into health. The TBA that you read is that image of incorporation, so like how does it solve any advantage?
So even if that was true, the TBA is distinct because all of the evidence that you've read are descriptions of broadband approaches to healthcare that say if we get more black people in to see the doctor, then everything's just going to be great. Our argument is that the government should do things like fund community clinics, which allows for team building from the bottom up.
Do you think that predictability is defined by communal consensus, literature precision, or some combination?
Some combination.
Some combination. What is the threshold for a focus on race that would trade off with class?
The 1AC has presented several statements that are pessimist in nature.
That's not really what I asked though. Like how much focus on race?
Well, obviously I'm not going to give you a threshold.
Okay, then how about this? In the world of the alt, what is the role of blackness?
I don't, that question is theoretical. Our argument is that...
it's an important theoretical question.
All right, how about this? I'm not going to answer.
Can you give me 2 or 3 examples of movements that would subordinate race to class, like your evidence defense?
Well, we don't need to isolate examples of movements. They do exist. We have isolated reasons why the affirmative strategy necessarily is pessimistic, which is bad. We're impact turning pessimistic.
Necessarily pessimistic, so it's bad. All right. The first card you got on the case. What do you define slavery as?
That slavery was a historical event that involved. It is an historical event and a present day event that involves the placing of people into bondage.
So wait, is it over or not? Because your first card says it's not. Or it is, but then you just said it's not.
It doesn't matter.
I think
what
the first
card
is no. What the card's talking about is distinction between health insurance in
slavery takes
during
place
middle passage
in
and now.
Formats. It was and is.
Did you say you're taking prep or not?
No, I said that.
Blackness is medicine's reference for sickliness and disease, health, sickness, health, and disease and insurance are only coherent based upon enslavement as an unconscious dreamer of ruling that inaugurated the world's ethical dramas by violently suturing blackness to everything that person in humanity was not. That's why the persistent misdiagnosis of black patients continues. The sharp evidence smokes. The Gilroy evidence on the specificity of medicine, which doesn't talk about the zone, by the way, that black people are perceived to feel less pain in hysterectomies before not black women are statistically more likely to be invasive because black women are viewed as always consenting, and why black patients are prescribed untested experimental treatments because they are still viewed as living laboratories or affirmative forwards historical tracing to illuminate the ground of the resolution. Demand for health insurance that enslavement beginning with the violence of the Zong. It's not Eurocentric like the piece of evidence says it was the ship named Hair that started the violence through, she then continues through J. Marion Simpson, CE, and experiments on black people as living laboratories. Just because the black suicide rate has decreased does not mean that the structuring onto condition of medicine has changed. Our contamination of the resolution is way better than their mental evidence. Our argument is that we should move to a mode of descriptive analytics rather than prescriptive instrumental solutions, considering the structural position of the whole that animates insurance deliberations as necessary to resituate discussions away from redemptive theorizations that can only reproduce the fungibility of blackness as an object of medical desire. That's a synthesis of pseudo evidence. It breaks the inclusionary demand of the resolution and circulates moments of refusal like the Black Panther Party's retreat from institutionalized medicine and the San Quentin prisoners' rejection of medicalization. Then would have sterilized them, voting affirmative as a connection of the archival tracing with an active process of divestment, a self-abolitional praxis that uncomfortably intervenes at the level of subject formation of non-black individuals. This is a jurisdictional question according to the Aaron's evidence that non-black people can only render a judgment that deactivates the political power of health that they have been afforded. There being 2017 evidence we've internally turned this new research practices are necessary to challenge the dominant mindset that creates a structural racism, which also means that we saw the terminal impact to their mental evidence now. Their ontology debate, the Saucier and Woods evidence impact turns their framing of the Tavernesi evidence they cannot win the anti-blackness is not ontological until they prove a time after the middle passage where blackness was ever severed from slavery, which proves that the weird libidinal move that the one NC makes in cross-links is important throughout this entire debate. Now, slavery was over, or is now, then it's a huge fucking question mark, because they have a very interesting psychological investment in maintaining the idea that there is that slavery was of the past. Our argument is that all the examples that they give in these pieces of evidence are, as a framing issue, is that they're moved to use individual examples of black resistance to prove the contingency of blackness is anti-black. The examples are functionally safety valves where white society can feel like an improvement has happened, so it's not to be attuned to the fact that millions of black individuals are incarcerated or the widespread political violence that still exists. Now, their court evidence is wrong. Well, listen, wait. Race the vertical distribution of values within humanity, but a black as ascending or being opposition low and or beyond humanity, distribution of values of the black human diet is essential to relationalities and ensemble across society. Gordon's perspectivity through which one knows one is among the living that no program of self-worth can bring the black into human recognition upon which relationality is predicated. Now, go to T. Our counter model of debate is that deliberation over national health insurance should begin to remain around the whole of NHI to determine how to live in the wake of slavery. That's a sharp evidence that provides a functional limitation. It becomes a question of how the app has split, or how or if the app is split from the whole and continues to animate NHI. They're going to give a limits exposure list and won't apply because those apps are not intrinsic to national health insurance. This grant is not concessionary because every departure from the topic requires a discussion of violence. They just dance around it while we forefront it. We get to weigh our app prior to topicality outweighs and turns different as offense. If we prove their mode of research revives a system of anti-blackness, then it should be mooted even if we make debate procedurally unfair. We are impact turning definitional precision. It's the same logic that leads to the assumption of care and insurance as necessary that necessarily leads to health. Therefore, debate in the topic version of the app just result in the same single-payer good bad debates where everyone just regurgitates Georgetown and Harvard's cards, which kills class and education. Also means that we're focused on counterplans and on the public's dissad, which means that we never actually address the scholarship of the 1AC. There's an inclusionism dissad too. The topical version of the app, instrumental reform requires the structural adjustment of blackness into the simulacrum of legal person of the sharp evidence as well. That's assessing Woods evidence that means that blackness lacks the capacity for bodily self-possession, which means that any healthcare policy presumes an access to subjecthood that is denied to black flesh. The fact that their own evidence defends a form of liberalism that improves our arguments about they were just a recourse to the same form of palliative that we've impact turn. Our impact turns are way more nuanced than a generic state bad arguments, which means that we don't link to their posture evidence. It's literally sending the debate status over the inclusion of black people into the medical apparatus as unethical. That's the reason why any topical version of the app is not just imperfect or negative. Granted, it doesn't solve 1% of the app. Debates about NHI are bad. That's when the thesis of the 1AC. You shouldn't test the truth here. It's a strategy that attempts to ameliorate violence with legal relief, which is lacking in the face of absence, where the very cartography of health is only made possible by the inferior deprivation of the slave, which means that even switching sides around it does not solve. That's a Saucier and Woods evidence. That let's see. There's a circumscription disadvantage model to be descended around a dogmatic view of the resolution that excludes the ideas that they view as a liability, as demonstrated by their attempt to modulate the imbalances of the community to exist perfectly around homeostasis. The powers of evidence it's conceded. The impact turns our notion of suicide debate and truth testing. The answer to our arguments. First, that subject formation now impact outweighs procedural game playing. Corporal skills are used to inject the body to break rules. It's how evil judges sleep at night. They ingrain the notion of anti-blackness into the psyche. It's driven by the fact that they don't have a strategy. This is the second most popular from the topic. Second is that they're framing a truth testing through suicide debate enables an unethical form of moral flexibility that allows us to ameliorate the violence that makes this to be possible. The violence that insurability and held is sidelined in favor of a discussion of procedural solutions that impact turns predictability. I'm going to read the last sentence now. The narrowness of debate allows those of power to dictate the boundaries of reasonable discussion and ignore or police everything that happens outside of every Oxford proportion government. We can see it's not a debate, it's a war. There's no internal link to research accessibility, but the app internally turns in their model brackets out giant sections of the most accessible literature. There's no analysis as to why debate as a game is just not a reason to vote negative. They have to win that their game is good to justify its existence. You should treat it as a counterpoint that we've in fact turned that benefit to. Now, there's no uniqueness to their APHA evidence, which already might be right-wing film, but they link to a more Matthew 17. Trumpism is in its purest alt-right variety form of the white working class identity, public center, traditional conservatism. Trump fans are seeing single mirrors part of that. Well, Britain's another Trump loyal conservatives all endorse various models of single payer. In recent months, and neo-Rex right to the alt-right welcome some movements trend towards a single payer welfare state extension can be accommodated if it serves other goals like building a political base among the working class whites. Which also means that their research practices are bad. Decade 14. Post-politics is a modernized form of politics which already recognized groups compete without challenging hegemonic religions. Politics is game playing without the possibility of changing the game. Consensus is not. They wanted to come is an agreement regarding the terms of disagreement. Consensus allows one to disagree but only within a given framework of sensibility. The ultimate target of radical politics is this framework. It's not playing a game. When soldiering is officially recognized transgressions but changing the game. It's all politics is a process of disidentification vis-a-vis a given framework that's sensible to open up space for what can be seen or was said, seen, and thought. Otherwise, post-politics is not a measure of medical events. Then freedom as an effective governmentality without restructuring the social space itself. Now go to the critique. Permutation du ball. The alternative is not any more material than the act. They can't name a single fucking movement, which means that they aren't historical materialism at all. If we win, if you're ever to use violence, that they cannot go for this position. It's violence without use value. It's not premise upon utilitarian calculations like the first. Taylor evidence assumes libidinal desires for targeting blood pressure are necessary and sufficient condition for violence. Now, we have only turned the act accelerate the collapse of communicative capital into by stripping deliberation away from prescriptive solutions to health. If we win this, then this position is a double term of framework proven by the fact that their own posture evidence says we need to uphold the labor of the negative. That's a double term in all their understandings of education. Now, they flatten violence by overextending its signifier to the class realm and denies the singularity of basic blackness that overcodes all distinctions. Wealth and class are viscous permeable signifers that one can enter and leave through material dispossession. Blackness is a static and it's a static marker and bears a permanent marking for violence based upon the level of phenotype. That's why LeBron's health is so vandalized with the hammer, despite it being one of the wealthiest men in the world. And Serena Williams' blood Cotton's blood was not believed when she went to the best hospital in the world. The alternative McLaren evidence to resilient subject to class consciousness. This is to bounce back from the trauma of capital and reclaim the very means of production that conditions this dispossession. It's a notion of agency that is parasitic upon blackness. For example, the South African International Socialist League tried to forward a framework of racism stemming from capital exploitation like their own threshold would say, but within 10 years emerged with the ANC government it opposed because its emphasis on worker solidarity marginalized black rural voices as backwards, and we must be educated to create class-based non-racialism. There's a futurity decided their Giroux evidence. It's an independent reps K. They link to the thing that the catastrophe is always looming on the horizon. Extinction is never present reality for blackness. They only care now that it threatens by being, which can only exist to suture their own subject position. What the Giroux evidence gives a functional alternative causes that is some new Keynesianism that the alternative doesn't solve, which also means that the alternative doesn't solve because they aren't any more material, because they're just a discursive intervention into the links that they're going to isolate in the block. But their grammar of class exploitation and communicative seizing of Marxist paradigms are based upon anti-blackism analogy, which means that we control the root cause. Verse 16. Capitalism is constituted by anti-blackness that the privilege as subject to Marxist discourse as a subaltern to a structure of capital, not what supremacy that the limit is its theorization of exploitation rather than accumulation. Marxism begins from and sees within, moving a whiteness that whose coherence is premised on the denial that capital was kickstarted by approaching a black body, that not a white body with favorable capital worker asserts that capacity for an analogical relation with it, where the exploiter, the exploited, and the exploiter share a being that is made through the denial of blackness position as slave. To attribute the latter's analogical capacity to the former is a ruse of analogy. What is essential to anti-black racism is, or the incompatibility between non-being and being in the class division concerned relation between intelligible terms that presume a common being whose being made coherent is premised upon the non-being of the slave. That current also impact terms the two pieces of evidence they read about the long case that says it's based on economic relations. That argument says that that's basically not true. Go back to T. Their understanding is based upon a logical preparation in which a perpetual refinement of our skills creates more predictable debates that will produce some sort of a transcendental subject that is bad. You can vote after the staging of our affirmative with their framework arguments for the generative organic ground produced through the interstitial moment of this debate, which means that true sensing is a dissection down to 15. The logic of reparation is grounded upon a notion of originary wholeness that in abstract and general equivalence it's bound with the strange empiricism. What's the relation between the logic of reparation and representation? What does that relation have to do with the telling the truth, the whole truth, the truth telling us way of making whole the normative arc of becoming a citizen, a subject, a citizen as part of this logic? What if there were a radical politics of innovation whose condition also to remain untranslated, whose resistance makes innovation possible? Makes innovation possible. I'll do that right now. 1 second. Innovation possible. All right, I'm good.
Cool. My first two questions are clerical. The first is, what was the jurisdiction argument that was made on here?
Non-black individuals can only engage in a self-abolitional praxis of deactivating the power of health they have been afforded. It's the Aaron's evidence in the one I see.
Okay. The second argument was the double turn argument on the K. What was it? That's why it applied differently.
Our argument is that T maintains a notion of cognitive capital that tries to maximize productivity and political pragmatism by continually refining our skills, pulling ourselves up from the bootstraps in the context of education. That's an impact turn to Marxism.
My next question is the 2AC sort of wholesale answer to a lot of the empirics on cases. Like, you have still identified that anti-blackness is ontic in its relationship to other structures. Why does that mean that certain reforms are bad if they produce empirically good
we would complicate almost every part of that sentence. The idea that these things are, our argument is that even in the context of widespread political reforms, our argument is that blackness still remains an object acted upon that confirms the master-slave dialectic, i.e. our arguments that the idea of the introduction of the topical version of the app, of single-payer ameliorating the violence that has historically been placed on black people, is only a paternalistic granting of help to those who exist outside the signifier of health itself.
The 2AC response to all of these arguments is that because it is still ontic, they don't matter. The fact that it is
I don't think
ontic
I said
means
that last part. But
you definitely said ontic at some point.
Yes, I agree.
True,
yes, we're making ontology arguments.
The fact that that's true means that the intensity of anti-black violence can change over time. So why are certain remedial actions bad? Why do they invest in the system?
Anti-blackness can change over time, but that does not mean it goes away. There's an oscillation between phobia and philia that changes in content but not in form.
So what is the alternative?
The alternative to what? Our argument is that these forms of violence constantly animate all of our discussions. Your attempts, though, try to parcel out these into contingent, packageable, translatable moments that we can identify and solve for based upon our political discussions here. Argument in the context of debate is that that's a terrible way to relate to scholarship as non-black people. We should divest from the very power that this scholarship
That in
produces.
and of itself, though, is a defensive argument. What is the impact to...
I know what you're
A
trying to
libidinal
ask.
circulation of
There are
anti-blackness?
two impacts to this argument. The first is that to the extent that all of the things that your Gordon Evans talks about, i.e. radical movements, are things that you want to create, that we have forwarded a framework of maximum captivity that is more capable of actually catalyzing those things, but that requires the prior destitution of subjectivity. The second is that even if broader structures cannot be affected in a way that changes the sort of nature of I guess like civil society writ large, there are ethical moments and acts of ethical research which counter the bias within the way that we research the topic, which Harvey says should be preferred.
Why innately? Why is that?
Because the archive is already saturated with images of incorporation. In the context of debate, the overwhelming consensus is that single payer is the place that we should begin our discussions.
Good images.
That-
What is the telos to that?
Telos is
To agitate against the existing anti-black structure that produces
also a
death.
quote
The
from the
idea-
1AC is that we need to forward an eschatology without telos that holds the end of the world as an ethical imperative.
10. responding to the right one if I respond to NDT 2, round 2? Is that the scouting one? Okay.
Yeah. I think she just like added an extra email to it.
Yeah.
Okay, that works. Did you find my case book at all?
I didn't. Do you all ever get the thing, like, do you all use the sidebar thing, like the document? Like, or rather, like, do you have what is it called?
Like, is it the
The
desktop pane?
taskbar. The taskbar. Do you have
Yeah.
the taskbar on the like the side of your screen? Have you ever got?
I've done that before, but I can't.
I do on my Mac, because I have a Mac usually,
That's fair.
so it just makes more sense there.
Well, his just did the thing where there's now a scroll bar between the different. So
I understand.
I was talking about how you have so many things open that you're.
It's okay. I had to get this computer because last debate my computer had like only 5 docs open and it just shut down. So I'm just like, yeah, I can't risk that anymore. The order, if everyone's ready for it, okay, is T with an overview and then case. There'll be a couple case things in the webinar, but I'll just like flag where I'm going, I guess, on the case debate. Sorry, y'all. I'm just stalling.
You're fine. You're fine.
Good. Our interpretation of the activity topic of the defense resolution debate is a game based on competitive incentives, win losses, and speech times. We are going to impact turn refusal as an affirmative strategy, especially refusal at the individual level. This means framework turns the upright. Demon paradigms require condensation means their interpolates the psychic balance view warrants a leads a personalized attack, inviting the one who see their offense is based off of individual refusals or grounds will be either to authenticity test or criticize black based experiences. This is further than ethical ground in order to get offense. We have to run to the extremes just by racism good or require ground link self-care span, which all rely on the premise that someone's experience is wrong and it creates a model debate that encourages personal disclosure. Their model incentivizes forces people to come forward with their own experience to meet their interpretation. Fourth, it means that every time a white judge votes negative is a rejection of blackness and creates psychic violence for black debates based if they lose debate. Second, impact is fairness. Debate is a game means procedural fairness is their terminal impact. It comes first, key to participation, ensure competitive equity for future debates, and the word another joinder means that condensation is a necessity for a space of deliberation. Therefore, internal links first is perfect clash post facto topic change means alters the balance of prep. The topic was negotiated at the end of the process determines research trajectory. So changing it structurally favors the because they speak NHI as Stacy's point is key to engage and prevent adversary and target mutual condensation. Second, its limits precise topics are necessary for reasonable implementation for T1's open-ended topic just by any method or actor creates unreasonable research burdens that trade off of personalized and create incentives for avoidance, incentives for taking moral high grounds. Argument refinements key precludes the discussion of the app, testing their truth claims, and assessing the education app through editor testing, debating the topic. There are multiple debates allowed to come to the conclusion with a debate. NHI should be implemented in the means of doing so. This ensures in-depth knowledge that transcends beyond debate to advocacy skills. This turns the case lack of testing means we can't know the truth of the claims of the what is here true. In the app essentially becomes an echo chamber where the negative can never learn anything. In nexus ground, the app is undebatable. There is the app justifies undebatable affirmatives. There is no literature on individual experience. Therefore, ground is key to fairness. Is necessary for the role of the negative. Is key to education. This turns the app because having ground allows negative to better understand advocacy. Also, fairness. All the fairness interlinks also reasons why education solves best. The interlink and education clash determines if we can discuss the app on an equally accessible basis and whether we can explore things we blow within debates, which is impossible without way. Research ground. Their interpretations ban for debate leads to any 2AC pivot post app to change the interpretation, but the genealogy also allows any kind of stasis point throughout the history. Therefore, it is unlimited because there can be any form of stasis point developed. Therefore, that's why NHIC is also infinitely regressive. Even if they focus on all genealogy, other kids can pick and choose the genealogy. Therefore, forming genealogy also links to all of our offense design. Just a question of the method, but a question of who affirms the one I see we do for from violence. Therefore, we suffer the argument, oh, violence, the TVA interpretation does look at black violence and how we can resolve those things. The impact turning positions have no impact. Prison is key to access, so we consider stasis points necessary for the inclusion of the topic is there. So warrants why bad single player good debate. It's not just debate. We also can discuss things like advanced grounds and access barriers and financing, which all proves the fact there are multiple ways to discuss the racial of the app. You should attach it to a plain text. Source predictability is good. It's necessary to generate classes. All of you. Yes, we connect our arguments to scholarship. We discuss the scholarship of the app. That's also the case for the inclusion disadvantage. Yes, we can solve for the fears of liberalism. That's a discussion of the big those technical, those techie details. The racial government heuristics as a policy is key to rectify the failure of liberalism by giving us a toolkit to challenge global mentality. None of their safe bad arguments assume the process of debating against revolutionary potentials. In 1914, one of the scholars uses the government and series of people the government to assess the effects of the other. That's scripted the government is a heuristic of the right. Lewis government works in to include the present trigger from the way the government is charged with continually enacted. So the government is a scripted tool for something to get triggered liberalism. That liberalism is the power of loving on the control of violence. Come forward to dominate states of the agenda. The committee go in, years ago. Yeah, it is essential for debating political agency. The government is to move on the same model of the liberal order. They criticize the privilege, abstract theorizations of these scholars for the descriptive governmentality, the power and substantive relations to say in this framework, political action, the course, deal with the produce of black people, faces the context and ability, idealist for conditions, the ways of political chaos, regard the consciousness rather than universal normative aspirations. The impact to all their arguments is the form of psychic violence, but we only or interaction connects those forms of violence. Arguments are not exclusive or inaccessible. Anderson's like subject, normative guidance, through the appeal to recurrence, about mandatory recommendation, recommendation, the relation of the order, which convenience, pragmatic, to the champions, in model creation, like creating the course of going, should the burden, or the moral testing idea, ongoing coverage, begin to ask that one would agree, the morally permitted, so what would be should be glad, but the assisting in practice of conversation, the evidence is honestly thinking, no way practice of the reason, agreements, way blood, can flourish, the interactive, universal, acknowledge the differences, agreeing that, various are espousing some procedure universal are necessary universalities, or other ideals, not give us embodied in but aims at encouraging political transformation, they can yield a weird, acceptable, all universalities unconscious, but the process is the politics, and also insert direct evidence later. The next argument is the TVA doesn't solve any type of I'll do that debate later why the TVA is necessary because we're impacting their arguments of inclusivity. So debate does solve because it leads to those objections to the negative. Therefore, they firmly can have a policy of single payer, which will be our TV. The DA of exclusion leads to the next disadvantage, the impact to it is the exclusion of liberalizing, but I think it's not important answer that the prior evidential answer on cases subjectivity to stand is also answered by the Anderson evidence. The moral flexibility, our argument turns the moral arguments to indicate the unmoral and ethical ground are justified under interpretation. You can cross that from the overview. The impact training predictability is necessary because it leads to safe points that lead to access for debaters. Also, the TVA solves for all of the impacts of this argument. The bracketing just said there is no exclusion within debate. It's not regulated based off or it's not regulated based off people, but it's argumentation. Therefore, the TVA does not actually regulate context. They Trump just said I'll answer. But no. Actually, go to the TVA debate. Sorry. We will impact from the black incorporation ban debate because technical discussion of these acting pretty effective opposition to the state TVA. White people should not determine the ontological basis of blackness. And in this debate have to determine who, if two white debaters can determine what's best for black people. But we will cite evidence from black performers who demand single payer. Here's the first evidence. Cites black coalition collected work on the ground for healthcare access cable. Now the collection of black hands urban national league and the black women's roundtable solidarity support for the comprehensive healthcare from the black women's roundtable believes healthcare is a human right women on the short end of the brain. The healthcare, the black women's roundtable believes healthcare level playing field for children. This is worse than the healthcare damage where black women and girls live intensive with black women's roundtable encourage Congress implement health insurance from market from and here's more evidence. White code for black lives also from health insurance. That is white code for black lives. National Working Group 15. The racism of the major grounds of the problems of people of color that access to health care. The decision was working the downside of health care systems eliminate inequities for which actually extend for current on its ability to live increasing the number of black Latino American doctors. This case of eliminating health inequities action when implicit bias the care patients color care patients of color. These physicians should join advocating for single payer. None of their office assumes our unique TVA. The universal health system is more specific than generic single payer. There's multiple warrants. There's thoughts here and what's evidence makes several ontological claims that we will answer all of them to provide healthcare reform is good. Or impact turn inaccessibility is in the healthcare reform and access is good. First, an example of law enforcement and Michael Brown. This is their thoughts here and what's evidence. Their evidence says that law enforcement and Michael Brown are bad, which is why liberalism is bad. But UPHS solves those failures in liberalism because it solves racism and law enforcement. It should understand structural inequity as a public health issue, i.e., when inserting public health in discussions of access and care, it allows policymakers to construct a new prison. They would have to establish a health impact assessment to monitor race of police violence. It requires administrative changes that lead to litigation against racist police officers. That's the APHA evidence. Second, it makes it aware about democracy, prison pipeline, but for current pharma companies are bankrolling anti-prohibition efforts. Therefore, an affirmative that bans pharma companies or regulates private insurance incentives also results in the impact. Also, none of their evidence actually assumes why healthcare is bad. Therefore, UPHS proving accessibility solves for most of the impact. Also, it solves racialized violence, it solves the doctor retraining that solves the implicit explicit bias in healthcare. Also, it solves biomedical targeting by reducing neoliberal profit incentives by actually looking to clinical trial standards that resolve testing examples like HeLa. Therefore, all these reasons of why it also leads to community clinics that resolve local care initiatives. All these reasons of why it should be good. Also, the only argument of why black voters show happenings because they're sheet of sharp evidence. So we're going to insert and explain some tweets, retweets like Green Sharp with the author of the Wakeford. They agree that single pairs are a good idea for a short even if the app can technically explain the way that sharp you should default consider single pair to be compatible with Wakeford because simply choose sharp athletes for, and they probably know what Waker is better than the app. For the next this proves the understanding of heuristic argument because the sharp thinks single pairs ethically would like to have a flutters in the Wakeford, and you can vote negative perception. Here's we inserted tweets of Green Sharp supporting Wakeford. Therefore, it proves that black women support single pairs. So it's either A, you vote for the app when they are affirming denial of healthcare as to white men, or the negative presents an opportunity for affirmatives to have that form of opposition. I'll go to the Trump argument now. Sorry, that wasn't disorganized. Single-pair discussions with Trump in office are uniquely important. How, for quoting Gaffney 17, you can have the NCO by way of President Trump. The time is out when you need to choose. The quotes are on policy related. When it's turned in PR, we can actually make it happen. Single-pair has potential to be a mystifying issue. There are lines of the issue. The result of the Trump years seems to go into single-pair. Wisdom, vigor, activists, those bills, providers are important organizing focus and will help us lead to a result of actual policy. Also, single-pair coalesces liberal agendas. Therefore, that's a solution to the alt-right defense. The next argument they make, the last argument they make is unpredictability debate and truth testing, but our argument is that testing discussing the app at a principal safety point is necessary to discuss essentially. Therefore, the mode evidence doesn't make a coherent warrant about why debate specifically, which are posture evidence and also the evidence talks about debate specifically. It's not a question of productivity. This is just a call for mutual agreed upon discussion. There's a distinction between determining boundaries for discussion and policing. Therefore, that is no argument of why T is violent, which kind of answers a lot of the bottom disad of the two case. The Dong answer will be answered in the 2 and R, but I want to answer the power evidence. Power is the opposite structure of the act. The market who thinks the government should provide forms of social insurance through reforms to think some debates are good. Power, same 1/3 of the nature and take the question. The table of the reality is almost and always never good time to talk about reform. The actual scope makes best worth examining the stripping the benefits of the impoverishing against the backdrop that may take place. Discussion of Occupy first slogan anti-work policies and against or living wage. The perfect time to ask for the word what it means. We hope they can describe the misfortunes what they can suffer. And yes, examples of reform do prove why optimism is good because life expectancy gap has shrunk in small in history. Yeah. Yeah, we're going to take some prep. We're at 4. How much do you have in We have 344.
You good?
Yeah, I'm ready now.
Okay. The Anderson evidence. Proceduralism is
Yes.
the most important prior constraint in debate. If Richard Spencer were to get up here and follow all of the rules of debate and read a plan text, would he win debates? Under your model?
I don't know if that can be answered because we don't
Oh.
get around the debate, but
So you
I
have a
assume
position
that
on whether an alt-right person, despite following all of the procedural rules of debate, should
obviously
be
we
allowed
don't
here?
endorse alt-right people. We think debate is a
Okay.
liberalizing activity that can
But he
produce
followed all
good
the
expected
rules.
skills.
He
But he
followed all
followed
the
all the rules.
procedures.
That-
So what you're saying is there's an element of who the subject is that goes into those procedures.
Are we saying that? I think that
That-
assuming, I think this is unfair to export an alt-right person debate and ask me if we vote for them. Obviously, we don't endorse alt-right candidates, but you're missing the question of the framework
No,
debate.
the
It's not the
Anderson
question.
evidence is literally like the only thing that matters is procedures. The topic is
I'm
the
sure
games.
he'd lose because we as debaters are smarter and more
Because
prepared
of who he
and
is
better
as a
than him.
person, right?
No, he would lose because
Sure.
we
I want to talk
debate
about the top
the shit out of
of
him,
the
and
two
he'd lose because he fucking sucks.
Top of the 2 and C.
That's like stupid
What
argument.
psychic violence happens if the judges vote out?
What psychic violence happens? We're talking about the model you export
Okay.
that assume
Why do we have to
attaching.
export it?
Yeah, I'm going to answer that if you stop.
Go ahead.
Attaching blackness to the ballot would mean that judges voting negative in any context in framework debates would lead to that denial of blackness. That would lead to
Why?
violence upon debaters.
Why?
Well, obviously, all of us in this room can't speak to
Yeah.
black
Our
experience,
argument-
which is part of our argument too, because
Our argument is said that non-black people should reject the political power they've been afforded. Why is the conclusion of your argument not just an externalization of complicity?
yeah, but that leads to a running of extremes, right? So if any non-black debater can lead to a rejection of the topic, they can essentially be Richard Spencer and decide to read "fuck all people" as the app. Therefore, precision and limits, giving health insurance being good as the app means Richard Spencer would never win.
But
What?
I don't think Richard Spencer is an Afro-pessimist. But if
Duh.
in the 1AC, we said that we don't disagree with any movements for black people outside of debate that require an appeal to healthcare institutions. Rather, our argument is just about how the process of debate should not circulate those images of incorporation. Why do we link to any of the portions of the 2 and C that are like, here's all these movements that black feminists are doing that appeal to healthcare?
Because the app, in every stance, we career front first cross-X, is that we are putting rejection. It should be a rejection of topic, a rejection of healthcare.
Yep.
You defended that. Therefore, that gets rid of like a bunch of movements currently happening.
What's the link between us not reading a plan and the devaluation of all these black feminist movements that are happening out
Well,
there?
obviously, we're discussing like real world policy changes and how that implicates that. So
Right.
that
I'm
kind of
asking
answers
about the
that.
internal link.
The internal link, well, we've obviously made spillover claims in the overview of why like debate is exportable. Yes, rejection and lack of, let me explain this too. I think the Trump argument just gives us more offense on this.
Okay.
Because debaters get technical skills and knowledge through debates of how to challenge fucked up Richard
So I
Spencer.
wanna ask you about
And
the
you
uniqueness.
preclude that by only linked to rejection,
Okay.
which is the only
Sure.
active lead to.
One last
Therefore,
question. The uniqueness of this. There's only you only have less than 10 negative debates on this topic. Why is there uniqueness
Don't
for
mind
the
me.
skills that we develop in these debates to go and engage the real world?
what? Okay, debate is all about, like, debate is about knowledge production and, like, discussions and what we're learning. So, like, I think it's exportable. I know a shit ton about healthcare now.
Just should be signed. So the order is case, and then the K. There's an overview.
This is a terrible question, but how much overview?
Just be safe.
Yeah, it might be about
Get on a piece of paper.
I'm just gonna put it down. We're gonna just do that.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I usually do, so.
Yeah, okay, cool. I don't know why I asked. Good whenever you are.
Okay.
The case debate, I'm just going to do the social debt stuff. We have specific evidence in the context of healthcare. The liberal economy does not affect / anti-healthcare retraining programs have been periodically effective in reducing experiences of discrimination and anti-racism. Lens can also be used to organize hospitals and provision. It results in firing of pro-Atlantic doctors. That's the Bailey evidence. Also, their totalizing theory of civil society is incorrect. All the human systems are unchangeable. Anti-blackness is a result of policies such as colonial poverty law that make being black, especially stigmatized policies aimed at achieving equality, can mitigate that over time because they combat inequalities like imposed upon slavery and history changes blackness over time. They do not answer specificities of UPHS, so you should hold a highway to a vote for these arguments. Now the critique, the impact overview.
Yeah, it's on there.
Okay. The impact overview, I'm not going to affirm a shift in method of a socialist pedagogy building that isolates and rejects neoliberal grammars of violence. If you think the alternative provides a better analytical response to violence, you should vote for it regardless of its explanatory power. It outweighs what is magnitude neoliberalism impacts to survival billions of people through economic and racial exploitation, deprives access to basic human goods, and escalates to social death and to social population through normalization of state violence. That is the impact that is categorically larger in scope than what they address for the white because they what they actually know. Now, two is material violence outweighs and determines ontology. Capital determines access to individual strategies of empowerment and self-care, and militarized neoliberal violence perpetuates psychic violence, proves that improving that condition must be a prior aspect of the app. Also, capitalism such materialism recalls all of what they cited as wrong and were found in 2001. Submonetization of the economics of this carceral institution dominated by the urban proletariat of the unemployed, the transformed class structure, the hybrid direct product of the evolving position of the new urban political economy, but ushered by boost borders and the organic structures of concept academic function as a reservoir, cheap labor for the city's factories and provided by demographic the human resource academic share harness divided Chinese deficits no longer to the edge of the metropolitan economy past manufacturing factories from the city the event black labor money rocket the entire black class social media hybrid now serves the negative economic pressure the stored surplus population divided market utility black and carceral population follow closely the demise of black is viable entry cause can be in the urban industrial setting Jim Crow the ghetto or race making institutions they do not simply propose an ethno-racial division that would somehow exist all racialized and arbitrary boundaries setting their African race apart denying its cultural origin history or observing as the fictitious necessity by joining the hybrid with the carceral that would be misreading the administration or for the decades of the deregulated economy in the post-Keynesian state. I'll put the evidence to state of the permutation to both argument. It does not solve versus the link wall of emergence has one is the framing of race as primary, is a faulty analytical violence. It causes a general inability for movements to engage in dynamic resistance because it undermines the power of coalition building and causes divisions which expands divert energy away from addressing capitalism. That's Taylor average. We don't need examples, but here's a great one. The WTO program has collapsed because of minute differences between people's perceived intensity of the effects of capitalist violence, which is something that the alternative was resolved because we isolate those divisions as being problems or systemized issues, but the alternative causes us to embrace it. Now they don't seem to spin out of this link argument by saying that the app is not pessimism or some new form of pessimism that our arguments do not apply to. That is bullshit. Their evidence makes clear why our arguments about inaction is trying to retrieve their app. The Kish evidence says that whiteness is the capacity to control exposure to future risk through action. Blackness and anti-archives who are unable to shield themselves which is a wholesale rejection of action as a strategy. Now, I do not do much work here because there's little too easy pushback on the nature of their theory, but they are totally flippant in answering all of our arguments. That means that they fucked up because our link argument is not that the app is not sufficiently material in focus, which is why the cross-sex questions about movements were relevant, but that their isolated pessimism causes a trade-off with material focus more generally, which they have not answered. So the alternative solves because this is essentially a pig out of pessimism. Now, two, is that their specific analogies be heuristic. The Zong metaphor creates a dualistic and reductive relationship between those they make prescriptive claims for and colonizers. That's over-determining and alienates those affected by colonialism for actually engaging in collective struggle against them. That's Gilroy and Yancey. No, the evidence does not specifically say Zong. That's irrelevant. Our argument is that the way that their prescriptive claims make them political determinations for others is alienating prevent struggle regardless of whether or not they are true, which is a nuance they have not grappled with. Now, starting with the Zong, actually decontextualizes slavery by presenting the Eurocentric slave trade perspective as the proper one. Johnson, no, for has African history rose supreme according to the definition of the European state. That slave trade did not begin in the same place for non-European traders and African slaves of historical grounds like African traders and slave trade has a differentiated from the European experience of parallel boundaries versus the majority of the slave trade across the Atlantic Ocean began in the interior of Africa, 100 miles away from any European. The first petrol integral the experience in Europe. The first kind of is light from pure stories to how the slave trade many focus on slowly and stories on the middle passage, treating the traders that began on the west coast of Africa and important Americans. They've unbelievably embedded the historical perspective of European slave trade. It was only from the traders, not from the slaves. That the slave trade happened to be only in the space between the coast they had bounded their Thomas in Euro-American slavery was not a system of active between West Africa and slavery was a system of political domination after aristocratic slavery, American slavery, and the African trade. The frontiers which were by African supervisory elite. We can still imagine another super role phrase from local political histories of war slave raiding. Eventually, we have to new identification with shipmates and active kin. Now, the third link argument, it's the mental card in the one I see. It's definitely a net card that they do not access. They lead to a proliferation of strategy building that necessarily trades off with praxis. This is proven by cross-sex, the telos of the app, that they engage in the creation of new ethical relationships that are good just because, ironically, that is a palliative that allows otherwise radicals from engaging in action, particularly sinister in the context of our arguments about their subject position, limiting their ability to ethically accomplish the app in the first place, because this gives a palliative for white debaters specifically to say that I've done good today, that is sufficient. Now, the link turn evidence assumes that they've systematized something as a result of the app, which is obviously not true. Methods debates obviously need to offer us to win links to their app. They don't get permutation because they can shift their advocacy to substitute the alternative ways any clash impossible, which kills strategy building. The link turn argument is answered above, but it's also proof of our argument. The Tracy explanation as to why the link turn decay makes it obvious that they confuse things like intellectual production with materiality, because apparently saying praxis is good as a form of production logic. That our evidence says that is the effect of displacing HC, a result of investment in pessimism. It also answers the double turn argument because it is an infantile understanding of what production is in the context of labor and surplus value, which is another link, because those things need to be explained. It's explicitly material and for them to be addressed by coalitions. Now, the race root cause arguments at the bottom, they're just that answer better detection by the quant card I read on the overview. Parasitism, that they identify and impact state false narrative or of corporatized divide and conquer strategies. That's the impact term with the solidarity good link argument. That's McLaren. Now, this is also not true that weaponizes white folk for good. This is killing 17 Trump is coming people that are going to double down on racism, escaping them like organization from the causes of their own suffering. White supremacy was able to disguise it as deep class attackers and also waste of class sovereignty. Academic anxiety creates a were able to use racism, but the racism will not address workers. Academic predicaments and there's opportunity to create multiracial opposition. Trump to do that. You need to limit the left of just now scripts of workers as hopefully racism engage with them and counter Trump's appeals to redress their grievances. I'll come down and disagree. This is the last thing you need to answer is the futurity decided. It's not true that futurity argument is a bastardization of what the draw it says. Yes, he cites examples of violence and their references were result of global neoliberal systems. The alternative can obviously solve because the holistic turn to identifying those things as good and rejecting links that cause a trade-off with this.
9:58.
debating institutional healthcare insurance establishes a pedagogical frame premise on images of black incorporation into the medical imaginary, which sutures the violence of anti-black liberal desire, the history of the Zong, J. Marion Simpson's unconsensual experimentation, Tuskegee, and the expropriation and heterogenetic black cells demonstrates that the world requires blackness as pathology for health to be coherent. This history explains persistent assumptions that black people feel less pain and therefore don't need care, which lead to misdiagnosis, microaggressions, invasive procedures, and untested prescriptions, even when access is possible, which proves that ontological questions have to be resolved before you can resolve the political implications of the framework debate. The absent research on health maintains complicity with black feminist refusal by tracing the entanglement of enslavement in healthcare. Aarons and Harvey say that the absent identification of the relay points of violence between past and present is an abolitionist practice that intervenes at the level of the subject against the archival violence towards incorporative images of black health. We forward the histories of refusal, like the San Quentin prisoners in the 20s who refused voluntary sterilization, the BPP social health model, which abstracted itself from institutional forces, and the Combahee River Collective's non-institutional support of reproductive health. This is a jurisdictional question, which is Aaron says that non-black subjects must engage in self-abolition because our own personal health and subjectivity is sustained by a researcher of medicine as an incorporative practice at the level of research, which means the voting affirmatives, the contamination of research that shapes the edifice of innocence that is offered to non-blacks. Anything besides that just simply recreates the very process of relegating blackness to fungibility. The power evidence doesn't go neg. It's a recutting is garbage. It says debate is happening. Not that it's good. It's also not a justification for institutionality at the level of debate, only at the level of politics, which is a distinction that'll be key throughout all these flows. 40 seconds across both speeches is not enough for the ontology debate. Anti-blackness is libidinal because the values privileged by society are achieved coherence through structural opposition of blackness, which produces a psychic drive towards gratuity. The middle passage robbed blackness of cultural identity, a la African nationhood, and replaced it with blackness as an epidermal mark, which over-determines it. The Gordon evidence doesn't understand that because he's still using a diasporic frame that assumes access to a traceable heritage, which ignores the natal alienation. It's why Creole and Patois were possible, but as pidgin languages, but aren't recognized as rational speech. One example outside their frame means you air Afghiri, and Haran says that an account of maximum captivity best enables material organizing. The most hopeless conditions bolster the stakes for radicalism, which is why Damian Turner's death in Chicago mobilized activists to fight for a trauma center in the South Side. Only we can explain overkill. They can explain shooting 100 black people once, not shooting one person 100 times, which is why was Stephen Clark shot outside his own house 20 fucking times just this past fucking Sunday. They can't explain that. If we win this, then every argument on the framework debate becomes irrelevant, because beginning from the supposition that blackness has and will bear the marking of slaveness, any debates over single pair are just a shuffling of deck chairs of on-tech violence, which means that they can't win an impact to proceduralism that would matter. Hey. We get a perm, and we solve both by interrogating the distinctions between our two methods, which you can understand as a simple process of just if material activism is good, that we can do that while still having a pessimistic frame, which is the argument that we made about maximum captivity at the top. Class relations can't explain any of our shit. Barber says that the violence which positions blackness is a form of despotic force relations, not exploitation. Violence is gratuitous because the antagonistic difference between black objects and non-black subjects is determined by who magnetizes bullets and who does not. The violence exceeds rational calculation, which is why the Zong example is important, because it would have been more profitable for Captain Collingwood to keep the slaves alive. This means that our impacts come before questions of political spell-out, because the symbolic economy is what debate is most materially mediates. If we win that they are anti-black, then it means they won't go out and align with black Marxists, which means any argument about pragmatic efficacy assumes a one-to-one correspondence between here and there, which is violent. We've impact turned all of their arguments at the impact framing stuff at the top. The futurity disab was dropped. They only care about extinction and widespread ecological catastrophe, one that threatens white beating. Ontology predetermines racial violence and already causes forms of destruction. Their argument that dispossession causes social death. There's also a Roosevelt analogy that is uniquely violent. The wholesale rejection, we're not a wholesale rejection of action that was above the pick doesn't solve any of our offense, which is all based on center refusal, which was above the quantitative evidence. Ontology outweighs materialism. He only focuses on violence of use value, i.e. labor from prisons, but ignores that violence is gratuitous. That was above. They should lose for reading Johnson. It literally says we should imagine slaves as shipmates or fictive kin, and it whitewashes the history of the Arab slave trade by replicating the myth of black slaves selling themselves. There's a massive exploitation to that, which is Barbara Evans, which indicates that they actually just lead to trade-off in terms of radical movements, in terms of infighting, which internally turns all the arguments about the WTO. We get to where we're at because we're impact turning whether or not the form of debate that they've talked about in the context of the division of topic is good. Ignoring our offense relegates blackness to the unthought. Debate can be a game, but it's a game with profound consequences, which is the power evidence about how the things that we do here necessarily implicate the modes of spell out that we engage in. Who can group the moral hazard arguments? We are not an individual refusal or personal experience. There's no interlink to authenticity testing. We don't force them to negate black self-care. The fact that they think we do proves that they have no vision of the topic that could actually solve any of our offense, and it proves that they're just unwilling to engage any of our shit because they have a dogmatic understanding of what black studies is. If we win any impact turns to their model, you vote out because there's no reason why the process of testing is good. They just lead to bad political skills. They just lead to political skills that become mobilized to do bad things, or a form of debate that may be fair but is fundamentally genocidal in content, which means that 1% risk of internal link defense takes out their impacts, but which assumes that debate totally breaks. But slightly less fair, politically efficacious game is better than an efficient, unethical one. Which means that we have defense. The model of debate was conceded. Our counter model's deliberation should begin around the whole of the resolution. Sharp and Kish which says that this outweighs definitional precision because the Zong was America's first insurance policy which enabled unconsensual biomedical experimentation that founded medical care. They situate health around its racialized history. We are impact trending where they locate predictability, not whether predictability is good or bad itself. They can win internal link. Our model centers competition over competing approaches to health founded by the black radical tradition, which allows for, which enables debates, which enables questions about when to refuse what is culturally competent care, Western versus alternative medicine, etc. This doesn't lead to any of their offense because we don't forefront any genealogy, but one that begins with foundational moments of the whole are the incorporation to sad impact turns the rest of the debate. It makes it unique, this argument that the archive is saturated with images of black incorporation to health and medical narratives of optimism, which crowds out black refusal, creates a false choice between entering the medical apparatus and being relegated to death. The impact that the research done by debate contributes to the funding of black bodies into the medical system. This intact turns votes which side debate and top version of the app. They drop the dike and demonstration indicates that they create officially recognized transgressions within the existing political system, but do not change the game itself. You can group all their black women demands for health arguments. We made very clear that we are not a rejection of black women's political movements for health. They must prove that their model leads to those things, but we are internally turning that because Gary and Haran is the only evidence about this in the context of maximum captivity. Sharp can support health care, but our argument is that at the level of debate that doesn't solve because it only bolsters a process of legal incorporation into personhood in which the very process of reading the continued sort of incorporation of blackness reproduces that sort of epistemic violence.
344.
probably my fault. I just put that down on the mouse.
What did you just do? Okay, that's fine. We are impacting pessimists, and we have evidence that reform is specifically good in the context of Black healthcare. The farm evidence indicates life expectancy gap has shrunk and the homicide rate has decreased, and Black people mortality rates have declined. That all proves that reform is possible. That's why we are impacting it. The TVA has a net benefit. They say the process is necessary, but no climate. The Baylor evidence indicates that healthcare, specifically, we have more specific evidence that Gila, an example of Tuskegee, are all explained to profit incentives. I mean, that neoliberalism explains by private corporations with the testing. However, things like clinical trials and research standards means that we can check back those future forms of tests. That's why genealogy fails to describe current forms of healthcare, which is our zong, anti-BPP, and sterilization are arguments that the Black Panther Party has advocated for community health clinics. So single payer can specifically do. Therefore, Black health refusal in the context of the TVA can happen, refusing bad forms of Black health, however, affirming good forms of it. Therefore, that's why the TVA can be a form of refusal, but also abolition and practice, and also affirmation of healthcare policy. The jurisdictional question, no, you should not vote on this, but vote on the fact that what is the best model for discussion. Our TVA has an evidence of why reform is good. Therefore, non-white subjects should affirm things that are better for reducing anti-Black violence, which is our argument why reform is possible. Also, you should be skeptical about the efficacy of white debaters arguing for what is best for Blackness, which determining what is best is what they are doing in this debate. Therefore, the powers evidence does go in our direction, and these institutional discussions is necessary. Also, the Bill evidence also into the social studies that I'll go there now. The Gordon evidence disputes that their anti-Blackness is ever truly ontological because structures and socially political design language. Their evidence says that Africanism is a deal project because it foregoes action thinking as a result of subconscious desire. Bill evidence indicates our that tavern science has several examples. Also, we do not need to win the ontology debate because the TVA has functional examples why we can resolve the impacts of anti-Blackness being ontological. They have conceded the UPHS argument that answers that we can resolve things like Stephen Clark being shot because UPHS leads to health impact assessments that leads to litigation against racist police officers. Therefore, the police officer that shot Stephen Clark would be litigated against because public health as a central issue for our discussions mean those things will change. They have conceded the spillover question. This was a 2-1 from there is no way they can win this debate because there is no impact. The TVA doesn't resolve, and it's also a form of refusal. Therefore, I'm questioning what the practice of the 2AR will be. Therefore, the future data said this was definitely answered. There is no like the row of evidence that there's crisis. There references the direct result of neoliberal expansion of the process of restriction, transport of the imperialist weapons. This was shadow extended, and there's no impact of Johnson evidence. We apologize. Can you print that? We will have an apology. We'll apologize for the Johnson evidence, but there's no dissent to this. Also, if we win from a procedural fairness does come first, it's necessary because the Anderson evidence indicates our arguments don't lead to exclusion, but only we can create fair practice for debate through actual discussion. This point, which we'll do on to the framework club. Top of the framework. Debate is definitely a game. Win-loss of secret points with the competitive incentives. Therefore, debate is a game. That means procedural fairness is in the impact of itself. Therefore, usually voting on fairness comes first because we can never discuss the 1AC. They have conceded that clash internally turns off their offense because we can never discuss the 1AC unless we understand the 1AC. Therefore, they have conceded truth testing after 1 year. Also, our fairness or interpretation solves limits and clash. Fairness is an endpoint of the game which determines participation in the burdens for small squads. Personal clash trade-off. Clash is advocacy skills. Impact is health. Impact is understanding of healthcare. Also, clash is necessary for determining the efficacy of the game and actually skills that are exportable. They have conceded or internally does not evidence indicates that research on government heuristics can lead to spillover because we know the technical details. Debaters are there who are able to go out and influence their ward and their community. However, it's also an interlinked education because testing the truth because the 1AC is whether or not we can actually understand it or else the applicants of echo chamber. They have conceded that this education impacts also fairness definitely outweighs the out because it's a procedural question which the ballot cannot resolve things like structural inequity. Therefore, fairness doesn't impact if you actually vote on. Believe they miss the point of our impact turns for second violence. Our argument is that there's a dissent to not defending the USFG. Therefore, defending the person as the actor of the resolution leads to things like authenticity testing and personal disclosure leads to attacks on Black debaters. Therefore, that's why an actor of the USFG is necessary, or else their model precludes. Their model leads to embodied politics, leads to more violence. Therefore, even if they win some of the impact turns reasonable, and we have internal link to our offense. We don't have an internal link to ours, so their offense is comparatively less unique, so lowers the threshold for voting for our impact. Our internal link provides defense sufficiently. Also, the Anderson evidence also proves the fact that why these arguments you should be weighing procedural versus structural, which they have not done. The explication in the 1 year, the unethical game is not true because our argument that the team leads to those forms of inclusion. There are inclusion, the bad things they're talking about, but inclusion that we can discuss in the anti-Black violence. Therefore, their counter method is not a reason to vote for them because the counter method, counter model prioritizes the song, but that means that there's unlimited ground because every aspect of anti-Blackness is and now also they can allow individuals to live and see the fact that without an actor limit they can justify any growth actor. Therefore, also they can identify any point of genealogy in history that leads to unlimited topic. But there. Yes, there's a trilogy testing. We do the design evidence, but that's why you should for our counter-interpretation that necessarily being USFG and century health insurance is necessary. The TVA debate central here because it answers a lot of their offense. We have evidence from Black women reformers who are advocating for single parent that indicates the fact that community clinics and active health insurance is necessary. We can refuse bad forms of Black health, i.e. the examples of Gila and Tuskegee are all examples of why bad forms of Black health also our medical evidence indicates that you can perform a lot of their black feminist critique arguments about how changing research practice is necessary, but the TVA does not preclude those changing of research practices. Therefore, a lot of that research practice can be alternative and changed within the TVA. We do not exclude those. That's why also discussions of the GMU HO actually can be the TVA can forefront the song as a narrative of the TVA. However, that means that health insurance should be coupled with it. Therefore, the endpoint should be single payer because we have evidence saying that your author, the main author, Christina Sharp, advocates for single payer. Therefore, what are you voting on? Their authors concede single payer is good. They don't have a prereq argument. Health insurance is a necessary end. Therefore, that means that we should forefront that. We also can include a lot of the TVA. Also, the TVA can have offense against it. Even if it's offense against the TVA, suicide, improved suicide debate is good because there should be offenses where on the negative. Therefore, that forms a negative connotation is good for our offices. Connotations that's good for education. In fairness, for us, the negative can be included on the topic. Basic level debate, like they said incorporation bad, but our argument is that we should develop things around community norms and census points are good. We're saying that incorporation in the context of health insurance is good because it can be, debate is the right form to discussions. It can see the spillover argument that debate leads to exportable skills because of understanding the app and leading to these forms of educational testing. So argument is that research is good.
The ontology debate isn't close to the reason why this debate is not even remotely decidable for the negative. Blackness is an epidermal mark that overdetermines subjectivity is objecthood and robs individuals of cultural purchase and heritage. Why natal alienation as a concept takes out Gordon's into understanding of relational resistance, which is the example of one era about how black pidgin languages like Creole and patois are indeed possible, but they are not recognized as rational speech within civil society because the world's semantic field denies against blackness. Small improvements in health and how immortality rates do not answer the arguments that we have made about the broader semantic field that positions blackness as pathogenic, which is way better than their farmer evidence. That's a drop historical analysis of the January instances and Tuskegee. The history of unconsensual experimentation pervades that in the persistent form of disproportionate rates of invasive gynecological procedures performed on black women. It proves that slavery's afterlife is still with us, that Gordon ignores, which is only performatively proven by the whole weird awkward cross-sex moment in the 1 and Z where they said slavery is maybe still not here or we're actually past it. Their answer to the Stephen Clark example shows that they only know how to retroactively punish someone for anti-black violence, maybe, but shows they cannot explain the rationality of why cops shot him 20 times, why overkill is a feature of black existence. This proves that there's a living undercurrent of violence that changes shape just by their efforts at institutional reform, which means that if we win the ontology debate, it means that they cannot win the rest of the framework arguments because of all contingent political solutions that inevitably lead by the wayside blackness' inability to be recuperated or repaired. The impact turns the starting point of every single debate that would occur within their model, even if it is procedurally fair. Each debate would require an additional flinch away from after-pessimism and analysis of social death, which means that at most 50% of the speeches within their version of the topic would be incapable of addressing the violence and positions of blackness within civil society. It's a reason why the interminable dialogue within our model debate is better. Voting affirmative situates research over the resolution of the level of descriptive analytics when the presence is the violence of the whole that makes health insurance possible. In the very first place, we have a jurisdiction argument that makes it impossible for you to vote negative. There is no game on this besides this idea that we might authenticity test people. If the conclusion of their arguments that we authenticity test white people, and that is fucking fine. Our argument is that non-black academics must labor for anti-slavery practice is non-institutional pessimism. It's a contamination and a programmatic charting of the archives of resolutional debate that currently relegate blackness to one of absence. So you should not be skeptical of this just because we are all white. We are the only ones that have evidence on this question. Be the Aaron's evidence. It would be more parasitic to invest hope in a system of deathliness given the fact that we have won the ontology. We go to topicality. They have misunderstood what they thought they were impact turning. We have never said that black women's movements for healthcare are bad or institutional engagement on the part of black people outside of the debate are necessarily bad. Just in the context of debate, what is important is, for us as non-black academics is not to circulate images of incorporation. That means they can be entirely correct that all of the nitty-gritty details of why we should switch sides about incorporation to the medical schema is good. But if we win that the context for all those things is within an ontological positioning of blackness as pathology, means that it is impossible then when that we should circulate those images of incorporation in the context of the resolution, which is why the fact that they have sharp evidence that sharp tweets, I'm not even sure even exist in the speech dog, by the way, that even if Sharp just literally tweeted once a day would be that we should be against Trump's healthcare. That is a fucking offense. Context is important, and we have other authors as well. But this debate, it's going to filter down to two things. One is that we get to wear our app against the procedural of arguments, as we are making arguments with a form. That question about context predictability and debate over their form of the topic is good. Well, they remain entirely within the content of such ignoring our offensive force precisely the relegation of blackness to the unthought that our evidence criticizes. The second is I want to be very clear, even if we lose our above argument, we do not need to win an alternative model of debate or even the procedural right to weigh our app to win on impact terms. We haven't done it yet counted their model of debate. So just voting not negative is sufficient to avoid a psychological priming of your capacity for violence, which means that the lack of impact activism with the two and means that the only material impact that you can effectuate is the psychological investment of anti-blackness on the part of us as non-black individuals, which means that that is the most tangible thing that you can vote on at the end of this round. Our model of debate says that deliberation should begin and remain around the whole of national health insurance. This is the grinding and predictable reading of that topic, which is proven by the fact that half of the community considers the Christina Sharp topical, and all of there are bad faith arguments about your unwillingness to engage. We have two defensive arguments that none of their stuff deals with. One is that, first is that every applicant or model must have a comprehensive intrinsic critique of the resolution. It must begin around the whole, so there's no internal link to their limited disclosure arguments, which is the only answer in the 2 and R to our model of debate. The second is that there's a functional limit that they've conceded, which is that the whole object of debate becomes identifying the ways that each applicant to flee the whole. Remember our framing of absolute versus relative predictability means that they can only win it. They can only win a terminal impact with a massive internal link. Well, we only need to prove our impact turns. Our impact of anti-black investment in subjectivity comes prior to procedural game plan. The powers of evidence impact turns. True testing. If our reading is better, their reading on cases was just a reason that's why debate exists, not why debate is bad. Our arguments of volatile scenario planning and simulations don't just remain hypothetical. They shape who we are. It's an active masking of violence through switch side and truth testing. It's proven by them that we're once engaging in the form of the violence that originary structuring form of violence of healthcare. The Johnson apology on the Capitol proves all of our arguments, but another process of debate divorces them of theoretical accountability. The fact that they can literally call slave shitmates and then just be like, oh, well, we apologize, we're going for fairness, is exactly the kind of way that their model of debate gets exported. Indicts the notion of their topical version of the app. It says that their method of adjudicating all this just becomes oriented around the God term of single payer. The incorporation is that is a middle level impact turn to their model that filters into the TBA and switch side because it supersedes all of their arguments. The hard evidence says that we have a uniqueness question that they've never answered, that the archive is already saturated with images of black incorporation into health and medical narratives of options, which means that there's no net benefit to having just 10 more negative debates on this topic about the nitty-gritty details of health. healthcare, but our argument is that your model carries out an understanding of black refusal that creates a false forced choice between entering the medical apparatus or being radically relegated to death. This is game over. I can see the Daikin evidence. They don't change shit about the game. It's why the top version of the average testing via suicide is only an officially recognized transgression that proves that they just pigeonhole all of these arguments about violence into their liberal progress narratives, which is somehow the two owners reference how the fucking shooting of a black person in the background of his own health is somehow available by passing single payer. What the fuck? All of this argument proves that under their model, every single way becomes a way of beginning with an image of a corporation, then further suturing the archive with optimism, which means that their starting point is bad and their ending point is even worse. Beginning with the notion of pessimism is therefore a better way to engage in the form of radicalization or outside of this debate that they have advocated because it forces us to not pat ourselves on the back, or because it radicalizes all of further forms of engagement. The one-year example of Damian Turner's death fueling the Southside movement for a trauma center proves that maximum captivity is the best frame for proving a spill out and a better way of engaging institutions, because we've internally turned all the residual politics of until they don't even have a terminal impact or impact factors into an arc.
congratulations to both teams on a great debate. The winner on a 3-0 is the affirmative. I promise to be quick. So I think that the negative wins a few things. They win that their model of public health that they wish to promote with the topical version has some benefits. I think that you all have answered the question that sort of largely because the AF hasn't answered it, that things like doctor training can reduce sort of some of the libidinal violence and pain. I think that it can be productive to provide health care for the lives of black folk. And I think that the public health approach that you provide could be okay, but I'm not really sure how much of the world it solves. I think it's like not net bad, but it could be productive. I don't think you establish / spend enough time on sort of the traditional framework components for me to really kind of put enough faith in that to say sort of they massively unlimit the resolution. I think they're like, look, 50% of the topic believes this. You seem to want to engage us in whether or not liberalism works. So I don't really know why there isn't sufficient clash. Now, all that might seem like it warrants a negative ballot. There are kind of 3 things that are going on in my mind. One is that, and I really wish that the 2AR would have started on the last argument because I felt like it was the most potent, and it was not answered, which is that, and it's perhaps a double turn, is that pure pessimism produces better forms of activism. And so the examples they give indicate that individuals can work outside of the traditional medical apparatus. I have a lot of ways in which to envision this argument as super powerful, but I view it in this debate, given the amount of time it was spent, as a giant sort of link defense to your topical version. Like, they could produce versions of healthcare as well. I think that they have also won an argument that sort of going with incorporation still fuels structures of anti-blackness. And I think this is a result of you all not pushing back on the possibility of strategically utilizing the law without a faith in liberalism. In other words, I think you needed to, in this debate, say, we can believe and we can utilize our call for single payer to challenge anti-blackness in a wide variety of fashions. This does not believe that we think in the same way that Christina Sharp believes that we should have single payer. That's not the end goal. In other words, I needed far more on why advocating contingent changes within liberalism are not antithetical to a more radical breakdown of anti-blackness. I think the other major problem in this debate for me is there's not much of an indite to the affirmatives method. They simply believe that refusal can be productive without any challenge, and I think that that is perhaps the weakest part of the AF and the place where the theory of anti-blackness is a powerful one, but how to deal with it is probably the place I would encourage you to focus the most. So I think that they have won that their refusal is a more productive strategy to overwhelm the theory of anti-blackness. They've got an argument that sort of pure pessimism can produce some of the benefits you describe of with health without much of a response. I think that there can be some good ones. The 1AR does a better job than the 2AR in that question. And so it's a better path to vote for the affirmative. The only thing I'll say to the AF team is I don't understand this debate space versus other spaces argument. It doesn't make sense to me. What should be our models of debate? Like, here we should say one thing, there we should say another, and I just like, I don't get it, I don't understand it, and maybe if we had dialogue about it, I would get where you're coming from, but my tendency to believe that I'm probably not gonna, even if I get what you're saying, be like, woohoo. Just as a heads up.
Okay. I was also very confused about that and how that is exported or imported. It seems like the warrant that y'all want to make is that in games where there's a triumphalist paradigm, like a ballot that signifies, but those are all warrants that I just didn't get, so I was kind of confused on that. Justin beautifully talked about the framework, so I'll discuss some of the case. I voted negative for the counter model of debate that investigates and interrogates the intrinsic precepts of healthcare as a legitimate pathway on this year's topic. I began with the political ontology part of the debate. I think the problem occurs early on in the block. Bottom of the 2 in C, you needed a further coverage. Some of these impact turns to pessimism. I think the top of the 2 in C was a little bit too top-heavy. Yes, you still have all of the minutiae in terms of procedural fairness. I think that you could have reduced some of the redundancies, get down to case earlier. Furthermore, I think the 1NR extensions on this case need much more explanation. So the warrants in the Gordon evidence, the discussion of how the world is not completely unfolded, the discussion of geological time, the discussion of being beholden to failure, all the discussion about Sartrean existentialism and bad faith, none of those warrants are discussed, and that's what you really need to impact turn pessimism. And that I don't think that you need those arguments, but you at least need one of those warrants that you can sit on in the 2NR. The only thing I have is the 2NR execution is something to the effect of it prevents action. So I think at the bottom of the 2AR, their argument that the power of refusal is what energizes and allows for a continual push to the dialectics, a continual push to each one of those movements, means that it doesn't, I don't see the warrant for inaction in that context, or at least you need to do another application for why ontology itself would have an internal link to fatalism, the discussion at the bottom of that evidence. It's almost a lack of a warrant there that I need, but I think there's also a couple of other arguments the 2AR makes. This question about how blackness overdetermines contingency in social life, that even if Gordon is correct at the existential field, is the phrase that you give me in the 2AR, that there is still a political field where those existential assumptions get scaled up, and that social life doesn't negate the social death when scaled up to the political. There's also, I have a problem with this in the context of healthcare. Even if this is true in the context of the abstract claims to contingency and violence, I still think that it doesn't match up with the healthcare specific claims, that in the context of insurential and financial systems, blackness operates as pathology. These arguments are pretty fairly well extended. This is their Zong argument, the Tuskegee example, blackness is not feeling pain. This is the argument I wanted in the 2AR that you didn't say. I really, really would have wanted that in the 2AR. And then there's a separate sort of disad to Gordon. This is the discussion they have of natal alienation. So Gordon's claim is that at the level of political ontology, that natal alienation, even if it doesn't exist at the existential level, their argument is at the political level it still does. And so this is the example they give of pidgin or patois languages. They say that this entire semantic field itself still necessitates pathology and captivity. And then I'm basically left with an existential claim versus a political claim, and I think that they do the analysis for that, the latter. In terms of the framework stuff, I think you need to do more work for why the affirmative unlimits. It's sort of just a reference that they would allow for anything within the black radical tradition, but then they have an argument that any one perspective within the black radical tradition is to engage conversations with other components of it. So it's not unlimited in that sense, or at least the way that you contextualize it in the 2NC is that it would allow for infinite number of individual experiences. But remember, their arguments about the lack of experience, the vagaries of power, where you take away experience and just look at the structures. And that's an argument I think you can more in-depth discuss, but at least have your defensive argument that it must be intrinsic to the precepts of the resolution. With the TVA, I just don't have enough specificity for what that looks like, and then obviously the political ontology discussion then above, and more impact calculus for what happens in terms of the debate as a game question. So they were able to, in the 1AR, preempt this, and they went a little bit further, so I just need some more hedge against that impact calculus.
Yes.
Great. I don't have a lot to add outside of that because they have a lot of intelligent feedback and everything. So in addition to sort of working on making sure you
clearly is access to predictable ground,
Yeah.
I think you should make that argument.
That arguments about using pessimism to generate more radical political alternatives might be a double turn. Do you have a way of maybe reconciling that for you in the future if something presses us on that?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know how hard pessimists you all are trying to be based on this debate. So I think there's some room for flexibility. I mean, I don't know. I'd have to dive into some of the examples. I'm just sort of saying, like, heads up, make sure you got that explanation ready. Not like, oh my God, it's glaring and there's no way out. But like, I remember the second example, the BPP. I can understand why they operate outside of the state and why that works, and you know, but there is potentially a claim that the three examples that the 1AR gives are built a little bit upon social life. And so I'm not sure, like I said, I'm not sure how pessimistic you're trying to be. And so I could see a debate where they say you think that you're Wilderson, but you're closer to Moten, and that's problematic.
That's right.